It was the sound of the lock clicking that hurt the most. Not the rain, not the cold wind coming off the Atlantic, but the sound of a heavy oak door closing in her face. Sarah stood on the porch of the Oakhaven Country Club. She was holding her 6-year-old daughter's hand, and she was shaking, not from the cold, from the shame. She looked down at her daughter, Maya. Maya wasn't crying, she was just confused. She looked up at her mother with big, brown eyes, and asked a question that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. "Mama, why don't they like us?" Sarah didn't have an answer. She couldn't tell her daughter the truth. She couldn't say it was because her dress came from a thrift store. She couldn't say it was because Sarah cleaned houses for a living. While the people inside drank champagne, she just squeezed Maya's hand. "Let's go, baby, let's go home." They walked down the long, winding driveway. Performance cars passed them, Porsches, Mercedes. Nobody stopped. Nobody rolled down a window. Sarah Jenkins made a promise to herself that night. She made it while the rain soaked through her thin coat. She made it while the lights of the country club faded behind her. She would never feel this small again, and she would never let anyone shut a door on her daughter, but she had no idea how long it would take to keep that promise. And she certainly didn't know that 10 years later, she would be walking back up that same driveway. Only this time, she wouldn't be walking, and the woman who locked the door was about to lose the only thing she ever loved. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat at her small kitchen table. The linoleum was peeling in the corner. The heat wasn't working right. It rarely did in December. She counted her money, $42, that was it. That was everything she had to her name. She had gone to the country club that day for an interview, just a waitressing job. She needed it badly. She had brought Maya because the babysitter canceled at the last minute. She told Maya to sit quietly in the lobby, just for 10 minutes. She gave her a coloring book, but then Mrs. Evelyn Thorne walked in. Evelyn Thorne, the name alone made people in this town nervous. She owned Oakhaven, or at least, her family did. She ran the board. She decided who got in and who stayed out. She saw Maya sitting on the leather sofa. She didn't see a child. She saw a stain. She called security. She told them there was a vagrant in the lobby. When Sarah came out of the manager's office, she found her daughter standing by the door, surrounded by 2 guards. Evelyn was there, sipping an iced tea. She looked at Sarah. She looked at Sarah's worn-out shoes, and she said 5 words. "We don't serve your kind." She didn't mean waitresses. She didn't mean mothers. She meant the poor, and then she pointed to the door, now sitting in her kitchen. Sarah felt a fire in her chest. It wasn't anger. Anger burns out. This was something else. This was cold. This was fuel. She looked at the $42 on the table. She grabbed a pen and a notepad. She wrote down a number at the top of the page. 10 million. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a joke, but she stared at it until her eyes burned. She didn't know how she would get there. She just knew she couldn't stay here. The next morning, Sarah didn't look for another waitressing job. She went to the public library. She brought Maya with her. She sat in the back corner, surrounded by books on real estate, on business, on finance. She read until her head pounded. She didn't understand half the words. Margins, equity, leverage, it was a foreign language, but she kept reading. She learned about distressed properties, houses that nobody wanted, houses that looked like her life. Broken, abandoned. 2 weeks later, she found one, a small shack on the edge of town. The roof was caving in. The owner just wanted to get rid of the taxes. Sarah made a deal. She didn't use money, she used sweat. She offered to clean out the property herself, in exchange for a tiny percentage of the sale when it flipped. The owner laughed, but he agreed. Sarah worked 18 hours a day. She hauled trash. She scrubbed floors until her hands bled. She painted walls late into the night, with Maya sleeping in a sleeping bag in the corner. It was hard. There were nights she wanted to quit, nights where her back hurt so bad she couldn't stand up straight. But every time she closed her eyes, she heard that lock click. She saw Evelyn Thorne's face. "We don't serve your kind." The house sold. Sarah made $3,000. It wasn't 10 million, but it was a start. She took that money and put it into the next one, then the next one. She learned how to fix drywall, how to lay tile. She stopped being the cleaner. She became the contractor. Then the developer. 3 years passed. They moved out of the apartment with the peeling floor. 5 years passed. Sarah bought her first commercial building. 7 years passed. She started her own firm. Jenkins Development, she stayed quiet. She stayed low. She didn't put her face on billboards. She didn't give interviews. She wore work boots. Not heels. People in town knew the company name, but nobody knew the woman behind it. She was a ghost, but she was watching every Sunday. She bought the local paper. She didn't read the comics. She read the society pages. She looked for news about Oakhaven Country Club. She watched the cracks start to form. Membership was down. The roof needed repairs. The younger generation didn't care about stuffy old clubs with dress codes. They were losing money, and Evelyn Thorne was getting desperate. Sarah clipped every article. She put them in a folder. She waited. Patience is a weapon, and Sarah had plenty of it. Then came the 10th year. The economy took a dip. Luxury spending froze, and Oakhaven was in trouble, real trouble. The bank was calling. They needed a buyer, or they would lose the land. Sarah sat in her office. It was on the top floor of a building she owned. She looked out the window toward the west side of town. She could see the green hills of the golf course from here. She picked up the phone. She called her lawyer. "Get me a meeting," she said. "With who?" he asked. "With the board of Oakhaven," she said. "Tell them I'm an interested investor, but don't tell them my name. Tell them I represent a silent partner." The meeting was set for a Tuesday. It was raining again, just like that night 10 years ago. Sarah stood in front of her mirror. She wasn't wearing a thrift store dress this time. She was wearing a tailored suit, navy blue, sharp. She put on a pair of pearl earrings. She looked at her reflection. She saw a few gray hairs that weren't there before. She saw lines around her eyes from years of not sleeping enough. But the fear was gone. Maya walked into the room. She was 16 now. Smart. Kind. She was applying to colleges. She looked at her mother. "You look like a warrior." "Mom," she said. Sarah smiled. "I am," she said. She drove her car up the winding driveway. The same trees, the same stone walls, but the landscaping looked a little tired. There were weeds in the flower beds. The paint on the shutters was peeling, just a tiny bit. Evelyn Thorne was losing her grip. Sarah parked the car. She didn't wait for a valet. She walked up the steps. The heavy oak door was there. She reached out and pushed it open. It didn't lock this time. The lobby smelled the same, old leather and expensive polish. The board members were waiting in the conference room. 6 men in gray suits. And at the head of the table, Evelyn Thorne. She looked older. Her face was tighter. Her eyes were harder. She didn't look up when Sarah walked in. She was looking at some papers. "Gentlemen," Evelyn said, and "guest." She waved a hand dismissively. Sarah sat down at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. "So," Evelyn said, finally looking up, "you represent this?" "Silent buyer." "I do," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, calm. "We need to see proof of funds," Evelyn snapped. "We don't waste time with dreamers." Sarah reached into her bag. She pulled out a folder. She slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of Evelyn. Evelyn opened it. Her eyes widened. The number on the check was staggering. It was enough to pay off the club's debts and fix the roof and renovate the pool. It was enough to save Evelyn's legacy. "This is substantial," one of the men said. "We accept," Evelyn said quickly. She tried to hide her relief, but her hands were shaking. "Just one condition," Sarah said. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "What condition?" "The buyer wants full control. The board dissolves today." Evelyn laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "That's impossible. My family built this place." "I am the chairwoman." "Not anymore," Sarah said. "Not if you want the money." The room went quiet. The men looked at each other. They looked at the debts. They looked at the check. "We have no choice, Evelyn." One of them whispered. Evelyn turned red. She stood up. "Who is this buyer?" she demanded. "Who thinks they can just walk in here and take my club? Who do they think they are?" Sarah stood up too. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. She looked Evelyn right in the eye. "Do you remember me?" Sarah asked. Evelyn blinked. She looked confused. "Excuse me." 10 years ago," Sarah said, "I came here looking for a job. I sat in that lobby. My daughter was 6 years old. She had a coloring book. You called security. You told me you didn't serve my kind." Evelyn's face went pale. She stared at Sarah. She really looked at her, and slowly, the recognition hit. The waitress. The woman with the cheap shoes. "You," Evelyn whispered. "Me," Sarah said. "It can't be." Sarah walked around the table. The room was so silent you could hear the rain hitting the glass. "I bought the bank note on this property 3 months ago," Sarah said. "I own the debt. And as of this morning, I own the land. This meeting wasn't an offer." "Evelyn." "It was an eviction notice." Evelyn collapsed into her chair. She looked small, all the power, all the arrogance, it just evaporated. But why? Evelyn asked. Her voice was trembling. Why come back? Why buy this place? Sarah looked around the room. She looked at the portraits of old men on the walls. She looked at the closed curtains blocking out the world. Because you were wrong, Sarah said. About what? About who belongs here. Sarah picked up the check from the table. She tore it in half. I'm not bailing you out, Sarah said. I'm starting over. I'm turning this place into a community center. The golf course becomes a public park. The ballroom becomes a library, and the kitchen. The kitchen will serve everyone, regardless of what shoes they are wearing. Evelyn gasped. You can't. You'll destroy the history. No, Sarah said. I'm making a future. She turned to leave. She walked to the door, the same door she had been thrown out of. She stopped and looked back. Oh, and Evelyn, Sarah pointed to the lobby. You can wait out there while you call your ride. But try not to loiter. We have a lot of work to do. Sarah walked out into the rain, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt warm. She got in her car and drove home. Maya was waiting for her. Did you do it? Maya asked. Sarah nodded. Did you get revenge? Sarah thought about it. She thought about Evelyn's face. But then she thought about the park, the library, the open doors. No, Sarah said. I didn't get revenge. I got the keys. The next day, the sign on the front gate came down. The members-only plaque was removed. Sarah stood there with a crowbar in her hand. A few neighbors stopped to watch. People who had lived in this town their whole lives, but had never seen the other side of the fence. Sarah waved them over. Come in, she said. One by one, they walked up the driveway. Kids ran onto the grass. Someone opened a picnic basket. Sarah watched from the porch. She saw a young mother walking up the steps. She looked tired. She was holding a little girl's hand. The little girl looked nervous. Sarah walked down the steps to meet them. The mother looked at Sarah's suit. She looked at the big building. Are we allowed to be here? The mother asked. Sarah smiled. She knelt down to the little girl. She looked her in the eye. Yes, Sarah said, you are always allowed here. She stood up and opened the heavy oak door, wide, and she held it open until every last person was inside. Because Sarah knew something Evelyn Thorne never learned. Real power isn't about locking people out. It's about having a table big enough for everyone. And as she watched the sun break through the clouds, lighting up the green hills of her new park, Sarah finally felt it. The lock in her heart clicked open. She was home.